Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us on our last leg of training for this Rotary year. Just to give a little backdrop on what has gotten us to this point as it relates to district training, way back in April, and it seems so far back, almost little over 2 months, we conducted our first, well, not first, but one of the sessions that was conducted by PDG Milton touched on grants, and the survey that followed after that session indicated that participants were very keen on finding out the nuts and bolts of grants application. On that session, we had, I think, close to about 167 persons attending, and a very high percentage indicated, that a working session or an interactive session or one that gets into the actual grant application would have been very important. So the district committee, training committee, we listened, and here we are today on getting this session out to you. So our presenter today, who is going to demystify this whole grant application process, is no stranger to the district. He sent me today his profile, and he insisted that he wanted it to be kept extremely brief. But he doesn't know that, having been PDG in the district, as much as you would like to keep it brief, it's very difficult to do so. But I'll basically go over what he sent off today. So PDG Roger Bose is the Grants Committee Chair this year and Chair of the District Finance Committee currently and for the next 2 years. He's a certified discussion leader for the Rotary Leadership Institute for all of Zone 34. Rotary International Director Stephanie and Incoming Director Peter jointly appointed him as Assistant Chair, District Governor-elect Training for Zones 33 and 34, beginning 2020-2021. He's a multiple PHF. He's also a major donor to the Rotary Foundation, which is quite significant. And we can't forget about his appointment to district governor in 2016-2017. In 2017, Roger spearheaded the first ever joint Rotaract district conference in our district. And the last line he has here on his bio says, "That's it." But I chose to put in something else. So he doesn't know, he had shared this prior. What does he do for relaxation? What does he do for fun? So I just stuck a note in here in that he wrestles alligators and he swims with sharks. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to present, to hand over the space to PDG Roger, our presenter for tonight's session. Roger.
Yeah, I thought the moderator would have. Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much, Abraham. Sorry, I'm in my office and somebody was just saying something last minute to me there. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you as well, Liz. Thank you to the training team who asked me to finally to do a presentation to our district. And when I found out that the feedback from the previous grant session was people who were interested in drilling down further into global grants, I really thought we'd have had maybe a smaller crowd, a smaller level of interest, because applying for a global grant, as you will find out in a bit, is not rocket science, but it is also not something that clubs do on a very regular basis. So I'm glad for the opportunity. I hope this session is something that is of value to you. I had a very tough time trying to condense information, because those of you who have seen or heard me speak before know that I can go off on a million tangents in a split second, because I have information overload that I want to share with everybody. But I'm going to try to keep it focused tonight, and I have a PowerPoint to share, which I will do in a minute. But to the French, I forgot to say bonsoir, mes amis Rotariens. I'm sorry if my French accent is not that great, but I didn't have a lot of time to practice for the last few years. I also know that we have a few participants on this evening who are not Rotarians. And so with respect to them, and the reason that they are here, obviously out of interest, obviously having been invited, and I'm very happy to see that people who are not Rotarians think that this is a session that they would want to take part in as well. Just for their information, I will just take half a minute to say very quickly that we belong to an organization called Rotary. Rotary has a foundation, and our foundation gives out financial grants to deserving projects around the world every single year. And they do this in a very, very big way, to the tune of millions and millions of US dollars every year. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is how Rotary clubs can apply to access some of these grants. Before I go to the PowerPoint as well, I wanted to share with you that I asked for a poll to be done in advance. Unfortunately, not everybody who's on tonight either had registered as yet or got a chance to reply to that poll. But what I basically did was I indicated what the session tonight would be about in 6 parts. And I'm going to share that with you now, so that you know upfront what the intention is with respect to going forward. The 6 parts are how to identify a project. That to me is the most obvious thing at the very beginning. And I will of course explain a little bit more as I go through each part. The second being how to identify a partner, because partnering is a very big part of being successful in a global grant application. We're then going to go into how to apply process and literally look at the application form, where I will give you some pointers regarding what is required and what is not. The 4th part, how to self-monitor your own progress throughout throughout actually executing the project that the grant was requested for. What are the pitfalls and what are the things to avoid, and examples of success stories in our own district. That would be the meat of the presentation. So when the poll questions were sent out, the questions basically asked which one of those different parts did you have more interest in or wanted me to try and spend more time on. And the results of the poll were that the highest responses asked for more information on pitfalls and what to avoid. And I think that's actually quite admirable, because you want to know where you might make mistakes and how to avoid them. Successful projects in our district was the second most requested thing, and how to apply, not surprisingly, was the third. So I'm still going to address all of these in any event, but perhaps I'll spend a little bit more time on the part that was asked about the most. Okay, so I'm going to start my PowerPoint now. Okay. Liz, we're there? You there?
Yeah, I'm seeing. Okay. Everything is fine.
Good, thanks. So I thought I would touch on district grants just for a minute as well, because of the fact that people hear about grants and they are not, people have asked questions about the difference between district grants and global grants. And I'm just going to make this very simple, because I think most of the Rotarians in the audience anyway need or know about this already. So district grants are small scale grants and usually short-term activities, usually a project that can be done within any given Rotary year. They obviously have to address a need in your community. Just like global grants, they have to be aligned with one of our 6 areas of focus. and the grant is a block grant awarded to the district based on accumulated donations from the past, and the grant is managed solely by the district. We are going to talk, however, about global grants. Mainly, the difference between global grants and district grants have to do with the quantum that is involved in the budget, and of course, the size and scale of the project. So right off the bat, the advice I have to give you is, if your project, intended project, does not have a minimum budget of $30,000 US, do not try to apply for a global grant. It's very simple advice. So if you know that your project is less than that, then your grant request should be either via the district or via other means. If your project is obviously going to be $30,000 and beyond, then you are able to apply for a global grant. One of the main tenets of a global grant, and what I want to try and I hope that I will remember to emphasize throughout this presentation, is what is it that the Rotary Foundation wants to see in your application. I think it is a state of mind that you have to have throughout all that I say for the rest of this presentation, as well as if you ever get to the point of actually doing an application yourself. Keep in mind at all times what the foundation would like to see you say or prove in what you are saying is really important with respect to the application. Many times when you're doing an application, we are so focused on trying to provide detailed information, which is of course important, but looking at it one-dimensionally. And I think one of the biggest problems, although I'm going to talk about pitfalls later in more detail, one of the biggest problems at the outset is that if you look at it one-dimensionally, you're kind of like setting up yourself for failure from the very beginning. So a global grant application must include a sustainable a project that would be sustainable and that can have measurable results. It must also, of course, align with one of our 6 areas of focus. And for those of you who don't remember, the 6 areas of focus include peace building and conflict prevention, disease prevention and treatment, water sanitation and hygiene, maternal and child health, basic education and literacy, community economic development. So in our application, we obviously have to make a case for what the objectives are, who the participants are going to be, how is it sustainable, and what is the budget and how is the financing to be arranged. For global grant applications, we must ensure that the grant falls within Rotary's global grant guidelines. Now, I did not have another slide to put up to indicate what the guidelines are, because I also want to double down, if I could use that term, on the fact that a lot of the information pertaining to forms, advice, and guidelines are available on the website, which is not that difficult to navigate once you go to the Grant Center. As a matter of fact, once you go on the RI website and you go to the Grant Center, there are many, many documents and articles and other information pertaining to the entire grant process. So one of the things that you definitely have to keep in mind all the time is that the Grant Center will be able to provide for you a lot of the additional information that you sometimes think may be difficult or hard to access from other people, but in fact, it's all available online. So those guidelines are online, but the idea of what I'm trying to say to you is that the grant and all of the parameters of the grant must fall within those grant guidelines, or else, once again, you're doomed for failure before you even start to apply. The grant also has to be technically feasible, and whether the grant is along the line of a humanitarian project, which most grant applications are, as a matter of fact, there is, which we will go through a little bit later, the part where you have to prove that it is technically feasible. And again, this is one of the big drawbacks with respect to whether you are going to make progress in your application or not, because in the application process, there will come a time when the foundation may have to ask you questions, and the questions will fall along the line of whether you are following the guidelines, as in point number 1, whether your application is your project rather is technically feasible. So make sure that you are making sure that you are ticking those boxes at all times. Some people skip this part, unfortunately, although it's very clearly stated in your grant application guidelines. But you and your partner and any partner club has to be qualified, and your district has to be qualified. For the good news is that District 7030 is qualified, and most clubs, as far as I know, in our district are qualified. However, if it would be a good idea for you to find out in advance whether your club is in fact qualified before you embark on this exercise, because it's likely it could be something as simple as a document unsigned by your foundation chair or by your president. In other words, it could just be some piece of paperwork that is undone that would make you unqualified, and with a little bit of attention, I'm sure it could turn into your being a qualified club in no time at all. This last point, I probably should have emblazoned a little bit more, because this is actually something that I have seen in my experience that a lot of applications got turned down for, and that is when you, again, too one-dimensionally thinking, you are so focused on, we want to do this particular project, we want to build this wonderful project to serve all these people, and we want to make sure it's technically feasible, and we want to make sure it's financially viable, and all these things we are giving attention to, but we're not giving attention to the fact that that need may already be addressed by somebody else, or it may be in a planning stage of somebody else's agenda, whether that be a government organization, another charity organization, or anybody else, as a matter of fact. And why I'm telling you this is because the foundation pays a lot of attention to investigating the feasibility of a project. That includes investigating whether or not that said project is already on somebody else's radar. And interestingly, as a point of advice as well, if it turns out that from their investigation, through you or otherwise on their own, they find out that what you are giving your laser attention to in your grant application is actually already being addressed by somebody else, you could actually fail for that reason as well. And when I say fail, I mean your application will not be approved. So it's not that there's anything wrong with the request as such. It's not that there was anything wrong, perhaps, with all the other guidelines that you were able to follow prior to that point. But again, that part is very important for you as a club and as a community together when you come to the point of assessing the community need, to make sure that said community doesn't have another organization or a government organization already giving them full attention towards something like this, because then the foundation would not be too inclined to want to go further. The last point on the slide was about what the foundation, what the World Fund would match, and I would get on to matching in a little bit. So it was simply to say that up to $400,000 US is the size of the project that the foundation would be inclined to be part of. This is just meant to illustrate the major, although the symbolism of this really is for you to ensure that for your project to be sustainable and to prove sustainable impact, these very simple guidelines have to be followed during the course of your application as well. It must start with a community. It may seem fairly obvious, but sometimes it's not, depending on the one-dimensional thinking of the applicant. So be open-minded even when you are having this discussion, of course. It must have local ownership. The foundation will not provide grant funds to any project that does not have, not necessarily 100%, but that does not have significant local ownership. So that, a little bit more on that, I will probably also touch on during the how to apply part of this presentation. But encouraging local ownership is a big part of making the point of it being sustainable as well. Providing training is also very important because I think the point here is that they would like to be assured that the knowledge and experience gained from the execution of the project, as well as what makes it sustainable after Rotary Foundation grant funds are exhausted, must include providing training in one way or the other. Buy local is exactly what it says, meaning that you're doing a project in Trinidad and Tobago. The expectation is, as far as possible, everything that you would require for that should be purchased within Trinidad and Tobago, as far as possible. They are very understanding to the fact that if some part of the project requires something that is foreign made, that has to be imported, that is only available outside of the local area where the project is being done, obviously they are very, very attuned to the fact that not everything may be possible to be acquired locally, but as far as possible, you need to prove that in your procurement of materials. Finding local funding alludes to the partnership in the project as well, and the fact that all of the expectation can't be on the foundation alone. Again, I will drill down a little bit into that when it comes to the matching portion. Measure your success, as I had mentioned in the very opening of this, is something that the foundation is also, the foundation will not entertain a global grant request that does not adequately prove that you are able to measure and report on eventually the success of each stage as you go along. So keeping that in mind with respect to the process is very, very important. In fact, this illustration by itself is quite powerful, although there are so few words on it. So just to explain very quickly from this diagram, the life cycle that your grant process will go through, there must be a draft. The draft will include what your general plan of the project is, or if it's a scholarship. I'm not going to talk too much about scholarships today, but if it's about a scholarship or a training program, there's a slightly different angle that it takes with respect to the draft. But again, I'm speaking in very general ways now because, of course, I have to try to cover all of the material this evening. An application is made online, and again, we will see a copy of that application shortly. There is an authorization that has to take place with club and district leaders. As grants chair, I have done many of those. As district governor a few years ago, I obviously had to do several of those as well. So that does require a process that may take a bit of time. When the grant is actually submitted, the planners of the grant are the ones who submit the application. Again, I will drill down a bit more about that in a minute, but it means that the skilled grant writers are the ones who will be submitting the application to the foundation. Once the application is approved, of course, the foundation will issue payment, and then the grant life cycle ends when, upon completion of the grant, the proper reporting that is required in the guidelines of the grant approval is carried out successfully to the very end. Now, I may have glossed over that very quickly, but the fact of the matter is that the completion part is what gives a lot of people a lot of stress as well, because they are so focused on carrying out the project, expending the funds, and making sure that there is finality to what they had started out doing, that they sometimes forget or overlook the fact that actual completion of the process, according to the Rotary Foundation, is when all these various reports and audit reviews have been carried out successfully, as far as they are concerned. Not as far as you are concerned, but as far as they are concerned. Okay, I will move on. Sorry. So, as I had said, the first part is how to identify a project. Very, very, very important. Rotary Foundation requires a document that is called a community assessment form. They ask about a community assessment form because, as the name implies, and as I had mentioned at the very beginning, all projects must be addressing a community need. And so this form the Global Grants Community Assessment Results Form is a form that has to be completed. It assesses the strengths, weaknesses, needs, assets of the community that you plan to help. It's a very simple 3-page form. It drills down a lot more when it gets into the actual application, but this is like a general overview of what you plan to do, and information pertaining to who is the community that you would like to help. So very simply, who is the beneficiary community or institution that you would like to help. Groups in the community that would receive a clear and immediate effect are to be highlighted here as well. The beneficiaries' demographic information, if relevant to the project. Who conducted the assessment, whether it was you as the host, members of the host sponsor, or members of the international sponsoring team. If you have a cooperating organization as part of your global grant, they may be part of the assessment as well. Bear in mind that what this means is if you're setting out to do a project and the community assessment part of the information gathering is something that you have to do on your own, or if it requires funds to do that, it cannot be part and parcel of the global grant budget. In other words, the global grant budget does not allocate money to doing the assessment. The assessment is something that you will have to handle on your own. So depending on the size of the project that you intend to do, if you need to source funds elsewhere for actually carrying out the assessment, that is your responsibility, and or getting cooperating organizations to help as well. Again, depending on the type of project, you may ask for or need or get help from a university or a hospital. In the case, for example, where a lot of global grant requests have been for equipment for hospitals, for example. So obviously the hospital themselves have to be part of the assessment process. The dates that the assessment were done is important to them so that they would know what kind of time frame was used in advance for collecting the information, and therefore how relevant this information was. So obviously you don't want to do an assessment 2 years ago to only now be looking to apply for a grant, because then obviously that assessment information is 2 years old. What methods did you use? This is just to prove the point about how deep did you go with regard to acquiring this information, and whether the information therefore is reasonable or not. If the community, people from the community participated, who did that? Were they community leaders or people from the community themselves? In which case you go back up to, did you do that via a survey or via having open community meetings, for example? List the community needs that you identified that your project would address. And again, it's not a trick question as such, but this is where you have to be starting to be careful about what you state. And you don't state something that is going to be different from, or God forbid, opposite to what your eventual grant application is about. So you need to start being very specific about what needs you're trying to address from this very early stage, okay? List any needs you identify that your project would not address. And again, it's not a trick question, but it is a very important question because it goes back to the part I talked about just now with regard to proving that you have identified something that is not already being addressed by somebody else. So the foundation wanting to know what you are trying to address and also what you are not trying to address is important to them in making their own coming to their own conclusion about maybe the strength of your application or the applicability of your application, if you understand what I mean. So listing the community's assets or strengths goes a long way when it comes to the application process as well, in terms of what the local input might be, and not necessarily money. I'm speaking about expertise, I'm speaking about time, I'm speaking about maybe even labor, that sort of thing. So considering the needs and assets you listed, explain how you determine the project's primary goal. If you, from what I've said and from how the questions are asked and the sequence in which they are asked, you could see that we are starting to like build a picture, or at least that's how the foundation is looking at this document, that you are starting to build a picture from what is there, what exists, what does not exist or they need, what do you think they need, why do you think they need that, and therefore you're building a case, really is what's going on here. You're building a case as to why does this seem important to you, why do you feel that you are actually filling a need that is not just required by the community, but also desired by the community. So then it goes on to how does your project activities accomplish this goal, and what challenges would have prevented the community from accomplishing this goal prior to the Rotary Club of X becoming involved, or prior to becoming the subject of your grant application. How is the community addressing these challenges now? Why are the project's activities the best way to meet this community need? Again, you can tell how each question is progressively asking more and more information. And actually, if you take some time to go over this document, which I'm sure you will do later on, there's a clear flow in my mind of how it progresses from one set of information to the next, which for them, as simple as the document may seem, actually provides a lot of information that is required for them to consider the viability of your application. Okay, I go back to the PowerPoint now, and oops. So, having done a community assessment in the way that I just described, we need to now develop a good project plan. Having identified a project via the community assessment that we just went through, developing a good project plan is very, very important to make progress. Appointing team members, and by this I mean, I'm going to drill down now to clubs. Appointing team members doesn't necessarily mean that the president is on the team, but as I understand how a lot of clubs operate in our district, it would make a lot of sense that he or she is. But people who are appointed as the team members would likely be people who are part of the committee, that is the Global Grant Application Committee or the Global Grant Application Team. And therefore, those are the kind of people who you need to know, the kind of people who are not just interested and not just want to lead the project necessarily, but also are people who are in it for the long haul. I failed to mention earlier on that district grants talked about a very finite time frame, usually within a year, and the smaller type of projects that district grants do, or rather fund. And global grants are the other side of the coin, which are larger projects and usually extend over a longer period of time than 1 year. So usually a global grant project is a long-term, multi-year exercise most of the time, and therefore you need to have committed team members who would stick it out, obviously, from beginning to end. The timeline is very important. In project planning, you might have heard of a Gantt chart, which a lot of people use to ensure that project progress sticks to a certain timeline. Similarly, with the foundation, they very much approach this with a project planning type of, a project management, sorry, type of approach. And so the timeline is very important for them as well. The plan for continuity, I talked about that just now, simply because the president will not be the president next year, who might be a team member. Others who might have jumped on board earlier because they were the foundation chair that year or some other position and thought it was appropriate and might not be or have that same position next year, may or may not want to be part of it. So the continuity part is very important. A responsibility matrix, and if you don't understand what that means, very simply, it's in a table form indicating all the different parties who are in this global grant application together, which are usually the host or the applicant club, their sponsor club, their partner club, who may also be a sponsor club, and any other organizations that may be part of the global grant application as well. So the Rotary Foundation, as the giver of the money, provider of the funds, are also supposed to be listed in their own very special way in the responsibility matrix, because remember, part of the requirement of acquiring the grant also has to do with ensuring that you stick to the guidelines of dispensation of the money, etc., etc. Creating a financial plan is one of the core parts of a good project plan, whether that's in your business or in your home to renovate your kitchen, And certainly if it's a global grant application, extremely, extremely important. This part too, very important depending on the nature of your project. It could be that expert advice might be needed, that hopefully you could co-op at no additional cost. You might have members who are in whatever capacity this project might be, that they, through their own vocations, they might be able to provide this kind of help. Obviously, whether they're from your own club or a sister club or a close by club, it would be a good idea to try and co-op their advice. District resources and cadre members, I'll touch on a little bit later as well, are very important for you to know and to co-opt during this process. Okay, we are now into how to identify a partner. It's very important during the process of applying to have an international partner. Some people find that this is a stumbling block, and I say to them that is only because you haven't really tried to look. So this part to me is quite simple and quite easy from the point of view that everybody knows, or most people should know, I think, what Rotary Showcase is. And if you just go on Showcase and you see what projects people put there and the interest that they show in certain types of projects, it's an immediate draw to the kind of clubs and where they are located, who you could reach out to with respect to this type of project. The link that is under Global Grant Partners is also a great source of information, because when you go there, it will also indicate by type of project or type of technical project that you are trying to apply for, which clubs around the world have a similar interest in the same type of project. And many of them also are past international partners of other clubs around the world that have been involved in global grants before, and therefore they have more than one type of expertise that they could bring to helping you do this, because they would be able to identify immediately club so-and-so from area so-and-so from district so-and-so is also interested in that type of project, medical equipment project, whatever it might be. And so therefore actually finding a partner that way is much, much easier than you might think. There are a host of online resources that you could go to, again, the Grant Center. With a little bit of navigating, you spend 10 minutes on the Grant Center and you'll be able to find many, many people reaching out to you, asking about potential projects that you might be wanting to apply for, and offering their help doing that as well. I want to quickly mention the DG and the PDG network. When you are becoming a district governor, you sit in the same class with everybody else in zone 33 and 34. In my time, it was 29 other district governor trainees. Nowadays, it's 31. Who will become your classmates. So from the time you are DGND until you are PDG and forever, they will remain your classmates. And what that provides to you is instant and usually very close-knit ties with your classmates really throughout the rest of your life. I still have extremely close ties with mine, and they are always willing and able, I have come to realize, to help you find a partner in a global grant application. So very quickly, raising funds. Again, a lot of people think that this is a stumbling block. It's actually not that difficult. There is a calculation that is done with respect to how much the host club can contribute, how much the partner club can and should contribute, what others could contribute, and then the amount that is matched by the foundation. I wouldn't go into the technicality of how that is done, but I need to bring up your attention to this rule change that will be starting from 1st July 2020, whereby in the past cash contributions were matched 50% by the annual fund of the foundation. That is not going to be the case anymore. There will no longer be a match to cash contributions any further. They will only be a match to host funds, international funds, DDF. Okay, so I had to bring that up from the point of view that even if you were to get cash contributions from others, it needed to be channeled, or it needs to be channeled in a different way, so that it could be 100% matched by the foundation. Okay. There are there are grant calculation guidelines that you could also find online that will explain and drill down further into how this is done. It's not rocket science, like I said, but I'm not going to go into it now because it'll just take up some extra time. But it's very easy to find, again, if you go into the Grant Center. So how to apply? There is an application form. The grant obviously has to satisfy an area of focus. I spoke about that before. All these bullet points with respect to the grant writing process have to be at the forefront of your mind when you are inserting the information into the application form. There's only one application form, and so as accurately as possible, you can put in the information that they are asking for. Obviously, that is to your advantage. So here is the application template, which starts with basic information. What is the name of your project? What type of project are you planning? Under which heading? Humanitarian, vocational, or scholarship? I spoke about that already. Select the primary host, which would usually be you, and who your international contacts are, which will usually be your international partner, who I just spoke about a little while ago. Who are the committee members? Again, I touched on that a little while ago. That would be those persons in your club that you know will be on this committee for the long haul, and a similar select people from your international partner as well. Do any of these committees have potential conflicts of interest? That will usually be a no and fairly easy to explain. Tell us a little bit about the project. This is actually an overview, and I need to emphasize the fact that having seen quite a few global grant applications before, this is not asking you to write a whole book. In fact, you're probably annoying people at the foundation if you put too much information here. It is an overview, and so all they want is an overview. So do not write 5 pages of material here in minute detail. Additional information, there are places for additional information that they would identify in other parts of the application, and indeed thereafter, when it comes down to drilling down into the details of your project. But for now, it could be a 1 or 2 paragraph explanation of what your project is. Which area of focus is obviously, as I explained before, obviously has to align with one of the areas of focus. Here they are. They could align with more than one, but I also warn you about that as well with respect to thinking that you might be amping up your application by ticking more than one box is actually going to put you in trouble, because it would mean that when you have to argue how your project aligns with one of these areas of focus, it means you'll have to argue additionally if you decide that it's going to try and satisfy more than one area of focus. I hope you get my point. So don't try to be too, don't try to go overboard, because you're giving yourself additional work and possibly you're giving yourself trouble in getting the foundation to agree. The measuring of success. Which goals in this area of focus will your project support? I'm not going to read word for word, of course, all what the questions are asking, but I'm just trying to give you a gist of how you should be answering these questions and not writing things that are overly lengthy with respect to this. When they have included links that you should go to with respect to additional help, information, or guidelines, or additional information that's not specifically on the application form, please follow their guidelines as well. This is simply asking you for a contact, a consistent contact person. In other words, the foundation over the period of time will be contacting you for updates or audit reviews or other information to do with financial disbursement, etc. All of those things are very important. And what the foundation does not want to do is to send an email that bounces, or be told that that guy not with us anymore, or something to that effect. That is only going to annoy the people who you are trying to create a good impression towards. Okay, so you want to have a good contact that is going to be long-lasting and that would always be able to provide feedback to them, which they would require on a regular basis. Step 6, very straightforward, location and dates. Where will this take place? If it's a vocational team, they ask different questions, as well as if it's a scholarship. Again, with respect to a vocational team, more information about participants and so on. That's very obvious. Cooperating organizations, I mentioned a little while ago. And just to give you a few examples, you may want to apply for a global grant for a project. Let me use an example that might be something to do with medical equipment. I give you an example just now of the hospital. The university might be able to provide some data that is pertinent to, let's say, surveys done previously as to why a particular piece of medical equipment might be required. The hospital might be able to give you additional information pertaining to that. Other organizations who may or may not have been looking at trying to help in the past and not been able to themselves might then be able to be co-opted as a cooperating organization to this project. So the question that the foundation had before about whether or not this project might have been on somebody else's radar, you could additionally strengthen your argument by saying, even if they did, they are now part of the application as a cooperating organization and we're not competing against anybody else. So that ticks that box and that explains that really well. Partners could include other clubs, Rotary clubs, etc. We don't need to talk about volunteers travel. As a matter of fact, right now, all travel to do with global grant, audit, reviews, etc., is on hold for obvious reasons. If it's a scholarship candidate, you need to go into more information about that. Rotarian participants, extremely important, as plain Jane as it looks on the application form. This is actually a part that's very important in the whole analysis of the application. It cannot be a one-man show application. It cannot be one strong-willed person in your club saying, don't worry, I'll do it, I'll take care of everything, I'll be the contact, I'll be, the mover and shaker with this whole thing. There must always be, and prove to be, maximum Rotarian participation in this, including from your international partner. So bear in mind that this question is actually a very important question towards the final assessment. So obviously I'm not asking you to bend the truth. That would not be the correct thing. I'm simply saying that your project needs to involve as many Rotarians as possible. And you can't just say everybody in the club would be involved. You can't just say that. You have to show and prove how everybody is going to play a role as far as possible. Now, bear in mind as well that whether your club is 20 people, 30 people, or 100 people, you don't need to overly try to prove this point either by claiming that all 65 people in your club are going to be part of this project, because that'll be very hard to prove as well. So don't give yourself more problems, okay? If only 6 or 8 people in your club, which is a very reasonable number of people on a committee, are the people dedicated to this project with a proper contact person, etc., that's what you will say, and that's what you will try to amplify here, okay? Now, budget. No global grant application has ever been approved without a solid budget. So I don't know how to say that any differently or any better. You need to have a very solid budget proposal in your application. Not just the how much, but as you could see here, additional information about description, supplier, depending on what the nature of your project is. And as you could see here, they even add in possible categories to include what other areas of budget expense that you may or may not have thought of or that you need some help with, including as well, are down here for you to see. Supporting documents, again, just very simply stated there, but mucho importante, okay? You must have, you can't just say, yes, that person said it's okay, or yes, that hospital said it's fine. You need to have a letter from the hospital, or you need to have a letter from the cooperating organization, or you need to have a letter from a university, as the case may be. Funding. So I touched a little bit on that before. I talked about contributions from other clubs, cash contributions, and DDF, and how you go about asking for that. I'm not going to go into that here because extensive guidelines with respect to that and how you go about that is available, again, online at the Grant Center and or through your DG, your PDGs, your DRFC, etc. Very easily. So I wouldn't bother to spend that much time here. Sustainability. another key area of focus with respect to what the foundation is looking for with regard to a grant. For the foundation, a global grant is not about a beginning, a middle, and an end. As far as the foundation is concerned, the end might be the part where the funds have expired. But for the foundation, the project must be something that could sustain itself post when the global grant funds are exhausted. And that is something that you have to prove beyond a doubt. Okay, moving on. If it's a humanitarian project, they're going to ask you about the project implementation. This is where details about the project plan that you had previously done and that I had spoke about, that you had done in a project management form or took project management guidelines to complete, will be included. Questions about the community and so on, straightforward, I think, and how the needs would be identified and so on. So this drills down a little further to what I was speaking about before with respect to the feedback from the community assessment form. Okay, what would be required if it was a vocational or scholarship? So I'm just going past that very quickly. They also need, of course, to be proven with respect to budgets and funding. Okay, scholar applicants is actually the last page of this document. So you see, really and truly, it's not a very difficult nor very long document to do, but the guidelines that I mentioned with respect to what you should follow, what is important to follow, and what you should pay attention to is what I'm hoping that I'm able to get across to you today with respect to where you should give and focus more attention to make sure that you meet all the requirements that the foundation are trying to find. You're not necessarily going to find one document that says the foundation is looking for all of these things, but I'm saying to you, from my knowledge and experience, those things that I mentioned that may not be glaringly obvious or that you need to give more time and attention to are the things that you do: sustainability, Rotarian involvement, excuse me, and budget in particular. Oops, before I get to how to self-monitor, I thought I would share this slide with everybody because, you know, a lot of people from since before I was governor and certainly during my travels as a governor, and since then, I hear the question or the comment from various people about donating to the foundation and why we should. And although this may sound like a plug for donating to the foundation, the very fact of the matter is that if we do not donate to the foundation, if the funds that funds that are available to the foundation to provide these grants will simply dry up. It's as simple as that. So there is a calculation, a very simple one with respect to when we make donations to the foundation, how much comes back to us as DDF, from which we get and use distribute district grants, but also the amount that we contribute to the annual fund comes back to us in a certain way that provides funding for global grants as well. So a very interesting piece of information with respect to how that calculation works, and the fact that every time we give, we actually can access much more than what we give, is by the fact that 70-30 Rotarians have donated over $4 million US to date over the years, actually, and a bit more than that. I don't have the exact figure as of today, thus far to the foundation, and we have accessed over 12 million in grants from them over that period of time. So that alone, you don't need to know all the ins and outs of the calculation, but that alone to me is impetus to say, well, yes, we should definitely be budgeting as a club and as an individual some form of donation to the foundation every year, because look at the things that we could do if we are able to access grants to that extent. That's 3 to 1. Okay, self-monitoring, the area where I'm just going to gloss over very quickly, because to me it's very important to, remember I spoke about the responsibility matrix, and in the responsibility matrix, of course, that would highlight and identify what is expected from your partner, what is expected from your committee, what is expected from the cooperating organization, and what is expected from the Rotary Foundation. And why I say that is because the Rotary Foundation has very clear-cut guidelines about expectations with respect to timelines, expectations with respect to disbursement of funds, etc. And they expect you to meet those guidelines. So establishing what the goals are, sticking to the project plan is very important with respect to self-monitoring your own progress. Communicate. Obviously, the amount I have to stress continuous communication between each other, between the other parties that are involved, the other stakeholders in the whole exercise is very important in order to make sure that everybody is on the same timeline, within budget, and doing what the foundation expects of you. I think at this point in time, I will say, and in a way it's a warning, but I want to share the fact that one of the reasons why District 7030 is an approved district with respect to accessing global grants is because clubs that have applied for and received global grants in the past have done what they were supposed to do, complete their reports and signed off and completed their projects. If you don't do that, you can actually cause the entire district to have a black mark put against us. So it's very important as an applicant to understand that your responsibility is not just to your own club or to your sponsor club, but it's the entire district when you actually do a global grant to make sure that you self-monitor, make sure that you do what you're supposed to do and regulate the expectations of the foundation and not give the foundation reason to continuously have to call on you and ask you what's going on. Don't put yourself in that position, please. Complete, and maybe I should have put this in the biggest bowl that I could have found, complete financial transparency is an absolute necessity. You cannot ever get away with you decided to do something else, or you funded something outside of the budget that wasn't approved, or you didn't have a separate bank account that you could clearly show the influx of funds and the disbursement of funds, which is critical to showing them and to showing financial responsibility with respect to their funds. This is probably the crux of ensuring that you do what the foundation asks of you and ensuring that District 7030 keeps up its approval rating with the foundation in order for future clubs to be able to get grants as well. Prepare for, again, part of the self-monitoring. In your timeline and in your responsibility matrix, there would be highlighting things about reviews and audit visits, for example. And when the foundation is telling you that I want your agreement to either a cadre member visit or some other type of auditor coming down in November 2020, I would like you to be prepared for a proper financial review. It could be a financial review, it could be a technical review, it could be both. You can't wait until the day before to summon your committee to say, what do we need to do or what are we supposed to be prepared for? Because even if your project execution was going along fine up until that point, you're going to embarrass us in a big way if you're not prepared, having been given adequate advance notice to know what you're supposed to do for a technical review or for financial review. I have been to an audit review meeting. I was going to touch on that later, but I've been to one, and I guess at this point I needed to explain that the fact that the club in question had the details of their financial information to such a great extent that the auditor was overwhelmed and actually had to say, okay, that's enough information. I think you've more than proven your point. I think is what the foundation would like to see rather than asking what else. So be prepared for that. So why do applications fail? I have touched already on some of the things that you needed to be aware of. A bad financial plan in the first place. Remember, we're talking about the application here, meaning you haven't been approved yet. So if your financial plan is bad, you're not going to get anywhere. Not being able to prove that you would be able to keep sufficient records and so on, all of that is part of your plan, which you obviously have to then eventually execute and prove, but you also have to show and prove that in advance that you're able to do that. I mentioned this point about not enough attention given to Rotarian involvement, and again, I stress that's extremely important to ensuring that your application doesn't fail at the beginning phase. When I was speaking about the responsibility matrix, and when I was speaking just now about audit visits, this is what this point C is referring to, that you don't want to have the foundation down your throat. If the foundation is down your throat, it means you are not doing your job properly. And while this might be more leaning towards having been approved a grant and in the execution of the grant, It's also, I think, something to keep in mind prior to doing the application so that you would know where to cross those T's and dot those I's in the application part, so that the foundation, it's made very clear during the application that the foundation is not expected to expend more time or energy that they would normally, or that they expect to expend on managing any of the grants that they have given to anybody. So if you prove that in advance, you're putting yourself in a very good position. And finally, with regard to why applications fail, not proving that there will be continuity after the fact. I kind of mentioned that already as well. Not proving that beyond a shadow of a doubt it at the application phase will also make you have problems. It could, for example, I have seen applications take a year before they are approved because the grant writers, the application writers, didn't prove this sufficiently at the outset, and it made the foundation have to ask questions over and over. So they weren't against the project or against approving the grant, they just weren't properly, what's the word? They weren't properly, they weren't given enough information for them to feel satisfied that this is something that you were able to do in executing the grant. Okay, just about time. So I mentioned I would mention very briefly some successful global grants that have happened in District 7030. There are numerous water projects that have been done throughout our district over the years. St. Lucia is one that has been spoken about for many reasons in terms of its impact after the fact. I wouldn't go into details now, but you could easily find information on this elsewhere. The Guayaba soup project in Suriname is a very interesting one, and I'll spend 2 minutes just to explain it, because this project actually started as a water project as well, and it has morphed over the last 10 years or so, I believe is the timeline, now into a superb project that I think is just one of the highlight projects in our district, to tell you the truth. Whereby, to explain very quickly, they went into a remote village in Guayaba, which is in Suriname, in the interior, and they went to do a water project for an indigenous people there. And the water project morphed into eventually the fact that there is a certain plant that the inhabitants used to reap and use for various things. One of the things that they were able to extract from the plant was an oil. And it morphed eventually, or it evolved into a project where they started to make soap from the oil, from this plant, from this village that they originally went to do a water project for. And many years later now, the Guayaba soap project is a big success. As far as I know, it funds itself. In fact, I think it funds itself and makes a profit, from what I understand now. There is no pharmacy in Paramaribo that you don't go into that you don't see their soap on display, as far as I understand. It was like that 3 years ago, so it's probably even more so the case now. So a real shining example of what a global grant means in terms of having done it successfully for what the original grant was intended to do, and then showing and proving sustainability and impact many, many, many years later, up until today, as far as I know. The Zone 33-34 Joint Districts Project is something that I was involved in. This was really cool because I spoke about your classmates and when you're training to become a district governor. So when we were DGNs, our entire class, which is all 29 districts that form Zone 33 and 34, decided at that time and that year, which was 2 years before we became governor, we are going to do a joint global grant project when we become governor. So in the year of our governorship, we would do all the application and all the background investigation, etc., while we were DGN and DGE, so that it could be executed in our DG year. So it was, and as far as I know, the only joint districts global grant project that has ever been done in Zone 33 and 34, either before or since. It was a project that was done for a piece of medical equipment for a hospital in Montego Bay. And the really, really awesome thing about this was that July 1st, you became district governor, and on July the 8th, 28 of the 29 brand new governors from Zone 33 and 34, including the brand new Rotary International president at the time, who was John Germ, all went to Montego Bay and literally opened the Global Grant project, plugged in machine, turned it on, all that fanfare, tralala. It was really an awesome thing, the way it was planned, executed, and eventually given a lot of PR and attention at the time by having all these people descend on Montego Bay, including the Rotary International president, literally a week into us being governor. It was really awesome as well, and that has borne a lot of fruit since then too. The last one I'm going to mention is the mammography equipment project in Curacao, and this is because the ABC Islands, you know, actually another thing about the ABC Islands, they joined our district during my year as district governor as well. I'm not bringing this up because of that, but I'm bringing it up because of the fact that the Curacao Club, even in the district that they had belonged to before, never tried to embark on a global grant application prior to that. And they did, and it was a very big one. I'm talking about something in the over $300,000 US category, which even of the global grant projects that have been done in the rest of 70-30, otherwise, I don't think there were any, I don't think that were any that were that large. But they very successfully executed that. And I also had the privilege, like I said, when a member of the cadre of technical advisors of the Rotary Foundation visited Curacao to do an audit review. I had the privilege of representing District 70-30 at that review as well. So it was nice for me as being the governor who introduced them, or I should say welcomed them into the district. And it was nice for me as well to see what a technical review was all about. So I just thought I would mention that because that has been a huge success as well. I mentioned my involvement. So lessons learned from understanding the foundation's role from beginning to end so that you could provide accurate information in the application process and then prepare yourself to provide accurate feedback and continuous updates to them is also very important. And the reporting function, which does come after the fact, but it should be part of your thinking from the very onset, has to be proper, accurate, and timely, so that we could assure ourselves of having access to grants in future. So global grant resources, I mentioned many of them before. I mentioned within our district how many people who have been involved in grants are the obvious people that you can go to. Our very own incoming district governor, Lyle, was very much involved in that St. Lucia water project a few years ago, and he is a great resource with respect to that right away, right off the cuff. Our DRFC, Milton, also a very experienced person in that regard. Our former DRFC, Hervé, who was himself part of more than one, or several rather, global grant applications from beginning to end. All I'm trying to say is that we don't stress enough, I think, the importance of the fact that within our own district, we have so many experienced and knowledgeable people who are very available, very accessible, and are very willing to share information and guidelines to help us access more grants so that we could do more projects, so that we could help more people, so that we could help our communities more. So don't forget our DRFC, our ARFC, and as I put there, good old personal contacts, meaning you know me. You know our incoming grants chair will be Lara Quintrell Thomas. You know all the other people whose names that I've mentioned. Very easy to reach out and ask for guidelines and help. Mr. Philippe Lamoise is a gentleman who I met in Martinique during the year of Hervé Honoré's district governorship. And this is a very interesting link that you should take as well, because what this is an exact match of clubs who are doing global grants or interested in global grants and categorizing the type of grants that they're interested in partnering on as well. So literally when you go to this site, if you wanted to do a grant on water, if you wanted to do a grant on whatever the type of project it is, you could literally find a matching club immediately who's already advertising what their interest area is, and of course, make a contact immediately from that. Okay, so that was the end of the presentation. Before we get to the questions, I just wanted to say this to everybody who is listening. You may or may not have quite a few questions. You may or may not have quite a few questions pertaining to a plan for your club for a global grant that's upcoming. I just wanted to say, it's been a while. I think I've been here like an hour and 5 minutes or so. So it's been a little bit long. I'm hoping that it was fruitful, but I also want to say it's probably unlikely that everybody's questions are going to be able to be answered now. So I want to give you the commitment that the website, the email address that is available to everybody with regard to where you can send questions, go ahead and use it. I'm assuring you, whether it comes from me or otherwise, in terms of who the expertise might be relevant to, you will get an answer to your questions. Not necessarily all tonight, not necessarily all now. I will allow the moderator to do his job. Thank you for listening. I hope I wasn't boring. And any question, like I said, that you need more information on, please send that email, and we promise as a district team to answer your questions so that we can encourage you to apply for grants. The more grants you apply for, the more impact we'll make in our communities. Thank you so much for listening.
Wow. Thanks a lot, PDG Roger. I couldn't help but notice, when your presentation started, people's face was only picking up about quarter of the screen. But
mine?
No, not yours.
Oh.
People who are attending. But no, I mean, all that information you have shared with us is going to half the screen now. Anyway, I think we got a few minutes for a couple of questions, which are going to benefit everyone. This is from Nigel. He says, prices increase over time. What happens if there are increases in cost during the project? Will the foundation cover this increase? And I just want to ask, as with all projects, just to append Nigel's question, as with all projects, sometimes we have, scope creep. Sometimes we have variations of all sorts. How tolerant is, the foundation to these changes?
As far as I know, there is always, or there has always been a figure that they would call a buffer. I believe that the figure was in the region of 5%, depending on what type of project it was. But that is something that that would have to get further clarification on with respect to how does inflation affect a global grant, I guess is basically what you're asking. I feel, however, without saying this definitively, but I feel that there is consideration on their part with regard to a buffer for some things that may inflate over time, yes.
Okay, cool. All right, this one is from Kant. His question is, when seeking a partner club for a global grant application, is it advisable to use the facilities provided by matchinggrants.org to list your project?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. Is it advisable to use them?
Yeah, to use the facilities provided by matchinggrants.org to list your project.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if the question is from the point of view of whether that would create competition for a partner. I'm not sure if that's where they're coming from with the question. Sorry, but I would say yes, of course, most definitely so.
Great. And I see on the previous question, David has just filled us in on some additional information. He says contingencies are allowed up to 10%, but you'll have to apply, of course, and justify it.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that clarification.
Right, and I think that's probably the last one before I hand over to Liz. With a project budget that includes line items for payment to third parties such as project managers and accountants, will that be approved, or can that be approved as part of your project submission?
I think the question is along the line of, are you able to hire professional people to be part of the management of the project?
Mm-hmm. Well, not only that, the costs associated with, if you want to say, indirect support.
I want to ask PDG David if he has better information than me with respect to that, because I think my answer would be yes, once
Said
that is
yes.
known.
He says yes.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, PDG David. Right. So I think that does it. PG Roger, I think you have stated that if there are many, I'm sure there are going to be many more questions as we pick them up in the chat. We are going to send them off to you, and maybe we can do a log which we can post on the district's website along with your presentation in terms of responses. So thanks very much again for a very informative session. So right now, let me just hand over to Liz, who is going to formally say thanks. And then we got a surprise right after her.
Okay. All right, PGG Roger. I think that, you know, we saved the best for last. Let me put it that way. We saved the best for last. Yes. I thought that your presentation, you know, it took a really good path, logical, sequential. It was very conversational, and I think it made it easy for everybody to understand. I think that the fear factor, which is something I think that has bothered people, for, you know, in terms of applying for a grant, would have been reduced substantially. I mean, I feel so inspired that I can start applying tomorrow for a district grant. What I liked also is the fact that you shared some of the pitfalls if you submit an application that is half-baked, how you can fail. So I thought that was very useful information. What I think too was, that was important was the projects you shared. I think that is enough inspiration for persons to go ahead and try to apply for grants. So thank you so much for an excellent presentation. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank our district committee. But first of all, I'd certainly like to thank the participants, because I think when we started off, we were not sure how many participants we would have gotten. But the first day we got over 100 participants. Without you, this would not have been possible. And it was based on the feedback and the survey that we did last year that we responded to those needs. So I hope that we were able to satisfy your expectations, or certainly beyond your expectations. And thank you again for responding, registering, and of course attending. On behalf of PDG Irvey, he wished me to extend a heartfelt thank you to our committee. And I know, you know, the theme this year is Rotary Connects the World. And I believe the method that PDG Irvey used connected our district. I'm now so familiar with so many people from across the district. I believe we actually lived that theme. And I know, having done that, opportunity will be created and doors will be opened for future training of a similar format. Now, to the persons who worked assiduously in the background, Vicky, Natalie, Irvy, with our translations, because we were running this English and French sequentially, which was something new to all of us, but it worked out very well for us. So a big thank you to all of them, and also to Sean, our Zoom expert. I mean, we relied a lot on Sean, and Sean usually make miracles happen. He would always find a solution to every issue that comes up. So Sean, thanks a lot. To AB, again, you've been with us throughout all the sessions. And I must say thank you to you. PGG Irvey, thank you personally for this opportunity that I had to connect. I know that when I want to have anything converted, who to call on, converted to French, I can call on. And I must, it would be remiss of me not to mention our district secretary, Leah. Leah has been a tremendous support to us, sending out information, sending out reminders, assisting us. And I know if I need anything to do with statistics, I can call District Secretary Leah. So District Secretary Leah, thank you so much again for all your help with this program. On that note, I'll hand over to AB, who will conclude.
Right, thanks Liz, and thanks also, let me also express, you know, on behalf of the team, our gratitude to yourself, Liz, for, you know, I mean, you have been around for all the sessions, and your contribution, you know, it's well noted. So I think on a strong note, I think it's timely that we get our closing remarks from our district governor, who is present with us tonight. So let me immediately hand over to our district governor, Trevor.
Okay, good. I think can you hear me now? Okay, great. Good evening, all. I see that the numbers, I think when I checked, we were somewhere above 120. I noticed we're down to 94. So people are leaving. I think having heard the presentation, I think people are so satisfied that they think it's time to go and get on with the rest of the evening. So I wouldn't be very long. I just want to thank again the committee, first of all, led by PDG Hervé, but including all of you. I don't want to start calling names unless I forget anybody, but all of you who have been involved in this series of training seminars, I want to thank you so much. And what I really appreciate is the approach you took to it. Firstly, looking at the needs of the district, and then shaping the sessions to address those needs. I want to thank you so much for doing that. That is an important part of what we have to do in the district. And of course, the district only exists in terms of to support the clubs and the Rotarians in the clubs. So it's important that we do what we do in the interest of the members in the district. I'm particularly pleased on this particular seminar on grants application management. That is very, very crucial. And I know in my travels across the district, in talking to clubs, that this is one of the things that came up that they needed. And I had promised that we would have seminars in various parts of the district. But with COVID, I think we've gone even better, and we've had them right across the district by virtual means. And I think that is a wonderful thing. And using the technology to connect has been really, really something that has come as a result of COVID. But it tells us that we could do a lot more in terms of having district-wide events regularly across the year, even if we don't get together, or if we can't get together as often as we could due to the vagaries of traveling and the costs, etc. So again, but I know District Governor-elect Lyle has a program which he will roll out, and I'm sure it's going to include much of this. So I think there's a lot more that we could look forward to in the coming year. I just want to thank you again for doing this, and to thank all who have participated. Certainly to thank PDG Roger for tonight's presentation, but also to go back and thank PDG David and PDG Milton for their earlier presentations, and everybody who's participated and everybody who's done anything to support this effort. With that, I would again just want to thank everybody for participating in their own ways, whether as presenting, facilitating, or just listening and gaining the knowledge which would help them in due course to lead to more and better grant applications, so that we could get more funds coming from the foundation into the district for the development of our region. We know our region is a capital scarce one, so every opportunity that we have to get more funds coming into the district, we should maximize and exploit them. So I want to thank you again for this. And the next thing I have to say is see you all, hopefully on Saturday, when we have our district business meeting. Thank you much.
All right, thanks, DG Trevor. So that's it for tonight, folks. Everyone stay safe, and see you next year.